Haschemyer, how are you?
I'm good. I haven't seen you for a long time, but not your fault. It's entirely my fault. I was traveling quite a few of the times that we had the open house and just couldn't make it.
Hmm.
Last weekend, I was in a place called Wayanad, which is, out in the wilderness and in a reserve forest. So there was no connectivity. I mean, there was connectivity, but it was very tenuous, I mean, if you're, for example, watching a video or something like that, it would take you about 30 minutes to watch a video which was about 3 minutes long. It would just stop, and then you have to
I
wait.
get it.
Yeah.
So though these sessions are important to you, you didn't want to make the effort. I understand.
Now they are important, yes, and I'll watch
I'm
them.
kidding.
I'll catch up on YouTube.
I'm just kidding about that. It's just you take blame so well that I like to test you by giving you more and then see what happens. Rohini, what are you working on?
I'm on the final draft, which is half finished. My novel, my first novel. So it's half done. It should be finished by the end of June. And July I can start looking for a publisher.
Well, that's exciting. Do you have some readers for it? Are you planning to have some readers for it, or are you just going to start shopping it around?
I'm just going to start looking for a publisher or an agent, maybe. I thought I'll look for an agent. There are a few I have in mind, so I'll start possibly in July. It's almost done.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
I look forward to being able to see any of it, some of it.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you feel like you don't want to share that in a kind of workshop because you don't necessarily want to get criticism on it right now? Because if you do, I totally understand.
No, I have no problem with that, but I've not finished the beginning. I don't work sequentially. So I'm working in the middle somewhere at the moment.
Yeah. I'm that way myself.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I will also have to stop early. Of the folks we have, I have some pieces from Ashvani. I wanted to meet today because we haven't met for a while. Abhinav, we probably have to talk about generating some more work. Last week we missed each other because I got no work and I heard nothing. So I just thought, oh, maybe nothing's happening. So I put it out of my mind, and then that's where it stayed. So, maybe we're getting to a time where we need to take a little break and sort of, reformulate and return to our resolve.
Yeah. I have some thoughts on that, and I've been meaning to send an email outlining those and bounce some off you and see what you think. It's something that I have to finish and send that draft over to you, that email over to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we continue to evolve. I mean, I think we also have sort of a different place for different people. I mean, I think there are people in the group who really should be getting ready to finish some work and submit it. And then there are people who are just still experimenting or just starting out, so we have kind of a lot of variety within our group. Okay, Ashvani, let's talk about your work, because you're prime among the people who need to work on completing pieces and sending them out places. This is your thing. Have you been sending any work out? Have you been getting work to the point where you feel it's complete?
Some short stories, yes. So one of them got published in an online journal called Tell Me Your Story, and one of them.
Fabulous.
One of them I submitted to, we have a Himalayan writing retreat here who ran a competition for short stories. So there were some 698 people who submitted, and mine was in the long short list of 22. So these are the, sort of things which keep me going.
You have Himalaya short story writing contest?
Yeah, so it is actually a Himalayan writing retreat, which does, online and offline courses. They have their place of their own in the Himalayas, and some of the courses take place there, and some of them take place on the, online also. So I did one of their first courses when they started with creative fiction. And so I have been getting their mailers and things like that. So I entered one of the competitions.
Okay. Well, you have to send me the information on that place, maybe on an email. And also, I hope that you shared with the larger group, but I know you haven't shared it with me, Ashvani, the link to your published story, because I would like to see that too.
I'll do that. I just didn't want to be, very pompous and sort of, about it.
I think it's better just to own it, just to accept the fact that you have a certain pomposity about you and go on in the world and have it, have the chips fall where they may.
And that pomposity would have been deserved if I had got the first prize or something. Then yes.
Well, but you have to, we're getting philosophical again, but you don't need to deserve your pomposity. It's simply something that you just have. Okay. You don't need to earn it. Well, let's look at your work. Oh, you know what I want to do? I want to do this. You sent me two pieces, one that I looked at a while ago. And,
yes. But that was, in response to your specific thing about writing just a one-pager. Trying to,
okay.
Yeah. The other one is the one.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at this, and we'll have you read a little bit of it.
Okay.
Rohini, hopefully we, maybe we'll work together to talk about it. This might be a nice forum for a little discussion. I'm sharing my screen.
This was that one pager.
Okay. Great. Well, it's just there. Why don't you read it?
Should I?
Yeah. Read the whole thing.
Ajay always opted for an aisle seat. The thought contented him that he could get up whenever he wanted to during a flight, to visit the toilet, walk up to the pantry, or just to stretch his legs, without having to request a co-passenger to let him through to the aisle. He relished the freedom the aisle seat gave him. The window seat was vacant when he reached his seat, and he had just settled down after depositing his laptop bag in the overhead bin when the window seat occupant arrived. He wore a white flowing silk robe, a colorful shawl neatly folded into a layered swath, perched on his left shoulder. Ajay looked up at him, taking in the more salt and less pepper flowing beard and the three neat parallel sandal paste markings across his brow. Ajay nodded as he got up to make way for him. The newcomer smiled to convey his gratefulness, his eyes crinkling amiably. A faint, pleasant whiff from his robe trickled into Ajay's nose, reminding him of his grandmother's ritual puja. The smile encouraged Ajay to say, "So, a man of God." Ajay looked at him and thought his eyes twinkled when he rejoined, "Well, we are all men of God." "Not me." Ajay's response was nippy and spontaneous. "I am a man of science, and I do not believe in God. Never have." Ajay realized his tone had been rather brusque, but was mightily surprised to see the smile on the white robe's face become broader. He was going to say something, but just then a raucous family, noisily advising each other on how to find their seats and trundling huge trolleys along the aisle, nearly bumped into them. Ajay and his neighbor hastily shoehorned themselves into their economy class seats to let the noisy ensemble pass. Once they were in their seats, Ajay proffered his hand to his neighbor while saying out aloud, "I am Ajay." Out of the folds of his robe, a hand appeared as if magically and held Ajay's in a soft, gentle grasp. "Good to meet you, Ajay. You can call me Aditya, although I have a longer sobriquet in my group, Swami Adityanath. So you are a scientist." So this was the beginning of a story which is about 5,000 words, and the scientist is a quantum mechanic scientist, and he and this guy, they get into a serious dialogue about how the scientist doesn't believe in God, and Swamiji, he's very well versed about quantum mechanics, and he draws the parallels between the theories about God and quantum physics and all. So that was the story which I had written for some other project. That story is complete. If you want, I can send it to you.
Okay. So you've completed this story for another project. Have you submitted it?
No, it was supposed to be part of I did one workshop where at the end they said that all the participants, if you would submit stories, then we can sort of draw out an anthology and publish it. But unfortunately, neither the person who ran the workshop and nor any of the participants have shown much enthusiasm about writing their stories. So it hasn't progressed much, but I stuck to my, self-declared time frame that I must finish by so-and-so date. And so it's finished and it's still lying idle in my laptop.
Okay. Well, let's talk about this. I want to talk about, with this opening, what's good. So what's good is that you were taking on my prompt, and I think that I can't remember what my prompt is, but they're always work in the same sort of space that I always work in. It seems like maybe my prompt said, get two characters on the page and get them into conflict with each other. Right? So you want to get them in the same space. And I feel like you do that. You set up these two characters, AJ and the person who comes, you delineate the two of them, and you create, you make them diametrically opposed. Okay, so that can sound a little philosophical, and it is in a way. I mean, it's the constructing. This is what we do. We sort of, I've been thinking more and more about this aspect of our work. We rhetorically construct these not exactly real experiences, right? We do it with language by creating a diametric opposition. In fact, right, Rohini, you'll probably agree with me, Ashvani, you'll probably agree, Abhinav, diametric opposition does not really exist, right? So this is it's a rhetorical construction that we're making for the sake of a story. And that rhetorical construction, we could say, are done for two reasons, depending on what we have as an objective. Ideally, our objective is we create this rhetorical diametric opposition between two characters. That's the conflict that we talk about. And conflict, again, is a rhetorical construction that we create for the sake of resolving that conflict at the end of the story. So whatever conflict we bring up in the beginning, we essentially battle it out rhetorically, going this that way and the other way, and at the end we resolve it. The other possibility is that we write something that's what I consider propagandistic, like propaganda, which means that we institute a conflict in the beginning. So, and I'll go back to the idea that that's a rhetorical construction. We institute that rhetorical construction in the beginning, and we go through the story, and we basically confirm that that conflict exists, right? So that would be propagandistic, because the thing that we initiated, the rhetorical diametric opposition of these two forces, we're basically confirming that this is a natural state that cannot be changed. Since the initial diametric opposition was something we invented, we're basically propagating the idea that we've already had. We're not confronting that idea ourselves. We're simply propagating it further. Does that make a little sense, Ashwani?
Yes, it does. But I was going to ask you that in the second type of, this rhetorical diametric opposition, and then reaching the end without a resolution, but with that certainty that there is a conflict. I would have thought that propaganda would mean that at the end, instead of just reaching the conclusion that there is a conflict, you would come to one of the sides being more right than the other, so to say.
Yeah, well, that's what, yes, that's true, right? So you basically have created a hierarchy of something, it's a diametric opposition where one of the forces is a straw man, basically, Ashwani, right? So one argument is a straw man argument. And so I have not read this whole story, but I can fear that they could go that way, right? That our character of AJ is simply a straw man who, regardless of how intelligent he might be, is finally going to fall at the feet of this other sort of more divinely inspired character.
Otis, I have a question here.
You could, although I want to say that construction, which is if that is your construction, you can do that, or as the writer, you can do the opposite, of course. Either way, it's an act of rhetoric. It's not, anyway. Yeah. Abhinav?
Right. So this is regarding this point you raised about propaganda, right? Now, almost if you look at a lot of books, they are somewhat in that nature, in the sense that there is a side that is right and there is a side that is wrong, and to varying degrees of certitude and forcefulness, the author brings out the rightness of the right side and the wrongness, the badness of the bad side, and the story usually ends with the resolution of the good guys winning over the bad guys. And there are obviously, literally infinite variations and subtleties in there. My point is, or my question is that given that this is basically a reality of a lot of the books, at what point or how do you define, where do you draw the line, how do you identify that, okay, no, this is not good writing, this is propaganda?
So that's tough. So,
or let me rephrase and clarify that a little bit. So, obviously, I'm not talking about those kinds of writings where the characters are drawn in a cartoonish shade of black and white, and the bad guy is uniformly bad and the good guy is uniformly good, and all the usual tropes and stereotypes that one can think of and employ to make one's case. I'm not talking about those ones, right? But every writer has their own point of view. They have their own ideology. They have their own a mission, so to say. They want to bring out a certain point of view that they feel resonates with their way of thinking and all. How do you draw that line?
Well, it's kind of a complicated. It's a little bit of a complicated question. So it's a little. So I sometimes think of music. In music, on the piano, we have, I think it's a B sharp and a C flat. Is it that? Is it? Are there those two? Someone can remind me. But they're basically the same note. We give them different names, but they're the same note. So it has a little bit to do with how we think about them, right? When we think about it as a B sharp or C flat, I don't think they're really used very commonly because they are overlapping, but we think of them and so they are, in a sense. The way I've sort of come to my conclusions about this, or my thinking about propaganda, is that I realize that in teaching the structures of short story, I'm teaching everybody regardless. But I also know what I'm trying to aspire to myself. And so the standard that I give myself is to not create a straw man, basically. So I've been reading Plato's Socratic dialogues, Ashwani, and it maybe bears here because this feels like a Socratic dialogue a little bit. We have someone who's Socrates, and Socrates meets someone who is a straw man, right? If you've read these, and Socrates basically makes the straw man look like a fool, and Socrates looks like a genius. Now, Socrates is here as a character, and whoever is brought in this sort of diametric opposition, right? And they're both being constructed by Plato. So we can say that Plato is writing the truth of what actually happened. I don't think so. I mean, I think we can agree that it's probably some kind of subjective interpretation. He also has this power to manipulate his characters to do whatever they want. And because Plato comes in with an agenda of where he wants to arrive at the end, just like an essayist or someone who's working with a thesis statement or a scientist who's working with a hypothesis. I have a hypothesis of what's going to happen, and look, at the end it did happen, and I was successful in arriving at my hypothesis. So this is something that the writer wants to accomplish. We do not have what I think we want to aspire to as writers, what I aspire to, and I'm not saying that I achieve it, but what I aspire to is to place equal forces together so that I create the issue of what's going to happen, what is going to happen, and that is a legitimate question in the work. In a sense, I do not know what's going to happen by bringing these two forces together, and I am constructing a catalyst. So the use of the word catalyst I'm taking from T.S. Eliot, and I'm not saying that T.S. Eliot is finally, arrived and divine in any way, because he still has his biases. We all as writers have our biases, and those are going to influence the way we end up writing our work, even to our best intentions to avoid our bias. But we want to have our best intentions. We do not want to bring an unequal struggle into our frame, because that's what we do. Rhetorically, we create a frame and we bring two forces in. So when we create our frame, that's already a considerable act of bias. Then we bring two forces in and we want them to be equal. So I would often joke, I brought up Mike Tyson. I would say, I've been saying this for a long time. I've been saying it longer than I really even understood how deeply I mean it. So let's put it that way. But that when you write a story, you have to bring equal forces to bear, not a strong force and a straw man, because if you bring a strong force and a straw man, the end is inevitable. The end, actually, I argue, already exists before the conflict even begins. Right?
Understood.
So why am I going to read the story? What if I'm a writer and I'm giving the reader something in which the ending already exists at the beginning? Why am I saying that it's worth the reader's time to even read it?
Now, a counter argument to that point, Otis, well, could be that, I know my audience and my target readers, they prefer this kind of a black and white fight between good and evil, and good has to triumph over evil, whatever my definition of good and evil might be. And I don't want to make them equal because this is a line of argumentation that might be used, that this is what the readers want, this is what the audience wants, and that's what I'm giving. People don't want subtlety in this day and age, so I am just writing what the market wants.
Right. I just went, my daughter loves Marvel, and so because she had the day off from school, because I don't understand why they have so many days off of school, but they do. It was a Friday. We went to the matinee to see Guardians of the Galaxy, which I like the franchise, but when I got out of it, I was like, oh, should I write an essay about how Marvel is propaganda? Probably I should, but it seems a little bit daunting, doesn't it? I mean, the Marvel universe is so massive. Their movies are so huge. There's so much money. What am I supposed to do against that? I mean, that's truly a pebble into an ocean, right? The trouble with, so when we create a frame and we have a bias, right? The bias of good and evil, let's say, or right and wrong, or whatever it is, right? That is the bias. That's the first bias. When we go through our story and one triumphs over the other, then good wins out over evil, or in this case, evil wins out over good. But in either case, we confirm the frame that we've made, which is a binary of good and evil. So that's the propaganda that we are basically propagating, right? That's the thing that we're putting out there. We're basically propagating that initial rhetorical structure that we're talking about, that there exists two sides, that two sides exist. And that to me, in my thinking now, and I have been digging very deeply into this because I actually have become pretty fascinated with the responsibility of what I do as a writer, right? I'm both capable of writing the work, right, and manipulating and creating these ideas that then are propagated, right? I also am able to teach people how to do it, right? And I also am pretty worried about where that rolls down. This thing going down like this.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit. Who is it? It's not Prometheus. No, Sisyphus. So it's rolling down, and I'm trying to push it back up, and it's not working.
In the context of then, Ashwani's a one-pager, this snippet. So did you get the sense that this might be propaganda based on the framing of the initial conversation between the man in the religious person and Ajay? Did you get the sense that the way it was framed, you're a man of God, aren't we all? And no, so it's a very stark black and white kind of a contrast that has been set up. Is that what kind of gives that impression?
In a word, yes. Yeah, I mean, because I understand it feels like it's taking on a cultural argument that already exists and that has been waged, in a sense for a very long time. And because it's being put into that frame, I certainly worry, because when I read the word science and I read man of God in this piece, given the tenor, I feel that science is diminutive to man of God, right? So I feel like I don't feel like I'm being given equal forces. And so I worry, but I'm going to tell you something that actually makes me even more. I'm going to get into like a little detail. It's just such a great moment, and this is something for us all to add to our toolbox, to basically scrutinize in our own work. If we want to be, we have two pieces from Ashvani, so we're going to actually dig into this today. Ashvani, lucky you.
Something.
Yeah, Rohini.
It read more like nonfiction to me than fiction, because I don't know anything about the guy. I mean, what is he doing on the plane? Where is he going? What's his problem? So it is more like a argumentative piece rather than fiction.
Yeah, and it has that flavor of the dialogue. I mean, that's what Plato basically did. He actually, in some ways, invented that sort of creating a personal drama. This is creating a little personal drama so two characters can talk. I would say that in general, in terms of stories, we probably want to stay away from that. Like a talking dialogue is not going to be as involving. But I want to get back to some of these big issues. So the difference between propaganda and what I aspire to do anyway is not much. Let's face it, it's not much. It's, again, I'll go back to the B sharp and the C flat. I mean, it's the same note, but it's just a question of a little bit of intentionality. But the way I try to do it is I try to create an equal conflict. I do not want to have a straw man. That the straw man is, it's a very age-old, I mean, it is rhetoric. I mean, that is rhetoric. The writer, the author, the speaker, the storyteller, they're the power, and the audience, the other person, is not. That relationship of author as being superior to the reader or the audience, that's well established, and that's the initial conflict that illustrates the sort of straw man base of our rhetoric. So, but let me give you this little hint as to, I think this is the route in. Okay, so the window seat occupied, arrived, he wore a white flowing. So we can see a little bit in the way that the man of God is cast, right? That he has this sort of almost divine, otherworldly, superhuman aspect. The way he looks, he's sort of beautified. But the thing, his smile becomes broader, and then, wait, I just want to look, the family comes, where is that?
In this,
the
the paragraph starting with Ajay, the third paragraph from the bottom.
Right. Okay, so AJ and his neighbor hastily shoehorned themselves into their economy class seat to let a noisy ensemble pass. Is that it? No, the Ruckus family. Okay, the Ruckus family comes. Okay, so AJ and this man of God are in a conflict. And the thing that resolves their conflict of the moment is what we call a deus ex machina. So that is, something comes in, basically, the deus ex machina means God in the machine. And I love the story of it because it comes from like 17th century Italian drama. They would have a play unfold, and then then this deity, like Aphrodite or someone would come down on a moon sitting there and then explain to you what the whole story meant, right? So that was like the God in the machine. They came out of the machination of the theater and dropped down. I love that story. And I've never forgotten the meaning of Deus Ex Machina after that. But the Deus Ex Machina is anytime the author, right, basically resolves things or does things in order to create resolution. And that's what happens here. We're at a point of conflict in which we might see AJ actually assert himself or regain a position of dominance. But the man of God comes, he has a kind of dominant position. He's beautified, he smiles broadly, he's wearing flowing robes, he has these attitudes. And AJ seems like, he's about to stick up for himself, it can seem. But then the narrator, right, the author up here, throws in a Deus Ex Machina, right? The family that comes in to disrupt that conflict and then now move them into a conversation that is, I'm going to imagine, is going to be rather philosophical. It's going to take us through steps. And I feel like I'm going to be dealing with a strong man. Ashvani, have you seen the movie Adaptation?
No.
Do you watch many American movies?
I do, but I haven't heard of this one.
You should watch it. It's got a great, it has a great it's a must watch for writers. Okay, it's a must watch for writers. It's about basically someone adapting a book, and there's a wonderful scene that basically highlights this idea of Deus Ex Machina in that movie. I haven't seen it for a long time. So anyway, Abhinav, that gives me a little bit of a clue that the narrator is taking sides. That's what the Deus Ex Machina does. When the Deus Ex Machina from the author, right? The author can manipulate everything. They can manipulate what all the characters say, what they all do. And when I feel like I'm getting an honest conflict presented, here the narrator comes in and disrupts it. And that makes me feel like the narrator is in collusion, right? They have an agenda. They have something they want to do.
So a Deus Ex Machina is essentially a contrivance that is not inherent or organic to the plot that the author has constructed so far. It seems artificial. It seems, how to put it, too convenient. That,
Yeah.
The long lost uncle who was a multimillionaire just happened to pass away, and he just happened to think of his poor, destitute niece and just happened to send her the exact sum of money that she needed to save her house.
Right. And in this movie Adaptation, the Deus Ex Machina is an alligator who happens to eat the person who is chasing the heroes. When I was in graduate school, I learned, I didn't know about Deus Ex Machina at that time, but when I was in graduate school, I remember the writer, I can't remember exactly the story, but like at the end, he basically trots through this tortoise that ends up being, like the tortoise answers all our questions, basically. I'm like, thank you, author, for supplying this tortoise that would just wrap everything up. The tortoise of certitude, we called it. No, we didn't actually call it that, but I call it that now in my mind. So let's look at Ashvani's other piece, because this is all working on a kind of continuum. And let's see, let's look at this one. Okay, where are my notes on this one? Ashvani, let's have you just get us let us understand the tone of this a little bit. I'm gonna make a mark. Can you see my piece here?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let's, I don't know if that'll show up for you, but maybe just read the beginning to that point, and then you can tell us a little bit about this piece.
Okay. A mail to Reena. Having finished with his morning ablutions and constitutional yoga routine on schedule, Jug fed his coffee maker a packet of brew, turned it on, and eased himself into his study chair at 8 a.m. sharp, pleased with his punctuality in respect of his writing routine. Switching on his laptop, he watched the keyboard light spring on. That always gave him a delightful feeling. As was his custom, before starting his writing for the day, he accessed his email to check if any email requiring urgent action had made its appearance in his inbox. His cursory look down the sender's list was disrupted rudely by the name Anand Sen. As the bearer of that name, a classmate of Jug's, had passed away in a road accident 2 years ago, the sender's name jolted him into sitting up in his chair and opening the mail eagerly. The mail was from Reena, Anand's widow. It was just 2 sentences. Jug's first thought was that it looked more like a tweet with less than 280 characters. Reena explained that she was using Anand's email ID so that her mail did not land up in Jug's spam folder. As for the rest of the email, it was innocuous and offered no news or information, nor did it seek anything particular from Jug.
Okay, thank you. So tell us a little bit about how this unfolds, Ashwani.
So basically, I was just trying to get this idea on paper that sometimes a very small thing can come and disrupt your writing routine. So there could be 2 reasons for it. In fact, most of the time, both the reasons coexist. One is that that particular thing needs your attention, and the other is, your writer's block, basically your procrastination. And so now you're trying to justify in your mind that the email needs attention. At the same time, you know that the right thing to do is for me to stick to my routine and look after the mail later. But what I've built up in this piece is that email bugs him so much that he's not able to get any work done for the next 5 hours.
Mm-hmm. And then basically towards the end, after we go through this for a while, he basically comes up with an answer, and his answer is, "Dear Reena, it is a pleasure to hear from you after so long a time." No, sorry.
No, this is not.
It's here. Thank you for your mail. I'm traveling. I'll be in touch when I'm back in Mumbai. Jug. So he basically comes up with an answer.
And the answer is not, it doesn't solve the problem, but it just gets him out of the current, numbness which he had, the writer's block which he had. And he's now managed to postpone, to defer that, the actual action to some other time and get on with his work.
And what would we call that, Ashwani? There's a phrase that I would use that I just introduced you to. What would we call that? That he comes up with something that basically resolves the issues for him in the moment.
Deus ex machina.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So if you get that, that is great. So the Deus ex machina comes in to basically resolve the issue in the moment. We never look at what's really more deeply at issue. And that's essentially, right, that's the narrator who's able to do that. That is not the narrator's job. We also have another name for this. It's called imitative fallacy. Everyone can write that down. So imitative fallacy, and it's very common in graduate level work that I've seen, in graduate level work that I've written, in the work that I write quite often. It still crops up. We will have a character, and there's a psychological reason for this, I feel. Like we as a writer will design a character who's a vehicle, in a sense, for us. And we understand that we have to put that character in a position of difficulty, and so we do that. but we don't really want to scrutinize that character. We as human beings don't want to confront ourselves. We don't want to confront our great fears, let's just call them our great fears. We don't want to confront our fears. And an imitative fallacy is when we allow our character to then also not confront their great fears. Because we don't want to confront our fears, we allow the character not to confront their fears. We think that it's an imitative fallacy because we have our art imitate what life is like. In life, we do not confront our fears, and in our stories, we don't have our characters confront their fears. That is an imitative fallacy because we're not writing life. We are writing stories. Stories are about something happening, and something happening is about truly confronting your fears. This, in a kind of complicated way, is going to dovetail with the other story. Okay, so, and actually, I think it kind of fits into your question too, Abhinav, like, how do we not write propaganda? I think the answer to that is that we scrutinize, in a sense, the issue of the character. The modern answer to that is that we do not write something that's prescriptive and outward facing, right? So when Socrates had his dialogue, Plato was writing Socrates in order to talk about something that he called truth. There was some big divine idea that would blanket over all of humanity. That's what Plato's objective was. What we do in the modern story is we scrutinize and try to deal with the personal story. What is the personal demon? What is the personal root? This is why we talk about arc of character in a story. What is it that they're afraid to confront? And then we force that confrontation and then see what happens. I drew, wait a second. I drew this note for you. Okay, Vani, it's in the theme of all is vanity. And though that's I feel like that's a deep part of Hinduism. Am I wrong about that? I mean, I think that's sort of that life course, particularly, like the person moves through the stages of life, right? And they're involved in their sort of combat orientation, getting their place, the householder. And then you move to the sage stage, it's really about giving up, right? Everything, right? Recognizing the vanity of materialism or something like that. Am I kind of close?
In a way, yes. I think for a lot of purposes that would do, it is more like it's the world is Maya, as in it's an illusion. And because we are living within that illusion, we are bound by our own desires and our own drives. And as we go through different stages of life, the drives and the desires change. So, the household, the age of the householder, right, from 25 to 50. And once you are 50, the kids are grown up, they're married and all, you're expected to, or at least that's what the prescription is, that start to detach yourself from the material pursuits that you have spent the first half of your life and start thinking about grand questions like, what is the purpose of life? And hopefully, if you spend enough time on it, by the time you say goodbye to this mortal coil, you would have gained a little bit of perspective and hopefully passed it on to the next generation. So essentially, this is that whole cycle of karma.
Okay, that to me that sounds quite close. Like the all
Exactly.
is vanity. That idea of the world is illusion. Well, that's a little bit captured in this idea of allness, and that vanity and the illusion are both those things, and also our thoughts about those things. Right? That's part of it. That we think about those things. Um,
Yep.
well, we're in the ballpark. But
Yes.
this is what we're trying to do in a story. And I think that in a way we can see a story, the function of a story, as being a kind of ritual that mirrors this process that you're talking about, Abhinav. It's like the process of breaking away, right? And arriving, in a sense, at a self. So the way a story so this is a way a story can work, and it's our job to try and construct it, not to try and take our character and let them off the hook. We basically, the subject of our story is our protagonist, and it's our protagonist. So, sorry, I'll backtrack a little bit. So when I first started writing, and I've also seen this in a lot of people who are developing their writing, I would write characters. I was engaged in imitative fallacy all the time, right? I had a perception. I was writing characters and I was trying to explore, my world, my perceptions. I was trying to discover something, but I would write characters that were like myself, and I would either lionize them or demonize them. Ashwani, you see your character, going back to your character who's the scientist, right? He's being a little bit demonized as he walks in here, and he's going to pay the price for being bad, basically, is what I think, right? So I would do that. I would sometimes be a character that was bad, and then I would pay the price for being bad, right? Or sometimes I'd be a hero, and then I was meant to be, then I would be so obviously a hero, but I would never, of course, be rewarded. I will tell you the truth. Instead, I was victimized by the world, which further confirmed my heroism. It was brilliant, So I could write these stories all day long. I had to get to a place where it was a little bit more difficult than that, right? And what I want to do is, and the way I get to that point is going through this process of storytelling where I can take a character who is something in a way, thinks that they are something, and begin to break it away. So
Otis, couple of things. One is, let's do a quick time check, and the other one is that Sunil, who joined a short while back, he has raised his hand. So Sunil, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Abhinav. Yeah, my question to Otis would be, doesn't everybody have certain intrinsic subconscious biases that would result in what I understood by what you meant as an imitative fallacy? For example, Arundhati Roy may believe she's the most objective writer in the world, but her writing would reflect her views, or say Lee Child or whoever, Joseph Heller. So all of them will have this worldview construct in their minds, which will have some degree of imitative fallacy. As in, I understood the character personification would be more complex and realistic if we examine our biases, but doesn't this whole concept have certain limitations? So yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely, it does. I mean, it has the limitations of our perceptions. Our perceptions themselves are a bias, right? We have limited perceptions, each of us, and they construct a bias. So at a base, I believe that that's the case. And I think it's I go back to sort of the idea of intentionality, and this is the way I think of it. I try to as honestly as I can. I mean, even as someone who believes that they're objective, right? It's their objectivity. And not to mention that there's very little hope of objectivity while using language itself, right? I mean, language itself carries a tremendous amount of bias in it. So, I mean, you're right. It's to me, I guess, I'll just make it personal. It's just a personal drive of mine, right? So, like, I perceive this to be a true issue of the writer's struggle to deal with their own bias, and because I finally want to write what Hemingway says, right? Write one true sentence. That has been a guide to me. I want to write one true sentence. So what does that sentence look like? And if I can write that one, then I want to write another one. And then I have to write a third. So I do make that my aspiration. So then the question is, how do I do that? My answer has been, I try to, as honestly as I can, engage in the process of storytelling so that I am creating something that does look like this picture here, honestly depicted. I'm not going to write a straw man. I'm not going to write my antagonist as a straw man, but I'm also not going to write my protagonist as a straw man. Ashvani, so that's a way to describe what's happening in your story with Ajay, or right? He's the protagonist, but he's actually a straw man, right? He's our point of view character, but he's not going to win, but you could write it the other way, where he's lionized and he's going to win. So the way I try to do it, and again, I'm not even to even say that I'm being really honest with myself would be ridiculous, because of course I don't want to be honest with myself in any way. So all I can do is try to do it and try to recognize my instinct not to do it, right? Recognize my psychological investment in not examining the most difficult issues, and then try to examine them. And what I find further is that then if I construct a story like this, right, I start off with a character who has basically some kind of difficulty. This is why I'm choosing them for the story. This character has something that they need to have confronted. My job as a narrator is to confront them as honestly as I can. But I also want to recognize that this character has a tremendous amount of power as an individual. They have a will to live, right? And so they're not just beaten down and victimized. They're also powerful and resilient. So the confrontation not only shows it, the confrontation is the necessary teacher, and it demonstrates their human capacity for resilience also. So we see the strength of the world of antagonism, but we also see the strength of the protagonist too. But the next little step is, so I have a character who comes along and they move along and they have the conflict. So Ashvani, that's like your character gets on the plane and then the man of God comes. So that's number one, right? That actually beats down our character, right? So it's a conflict and it doesn't happen. It's not happily discussing things. It actually does something. It affects them. The conflict affects the character. But the character also has resilience, right? And they rise again to be confronted again. They go down, they rise again to be confronted again. So we see this story of confrontation and resilience over and over until the character is essentially beaten down to their lowest point, in which they're stripped of all of their vanity, all of their perceptions of their incredible intelligence, their high-minded ideals, their perception of their own honesty, whatever it is they've adopted to protect themselves in the world, all of that is stripped away. And then what are they? And at this point, when they're at their lowest point, and I think that this is important for us as a storyteller, we give our character a true choice. So I'm going to go back to the idea of the imitative fallacy, Ashwani, not to, your story, that construction, the straw man, your character, AJ, he's not going to have a choice at the end of that story. He's going to lose. He's going to lose. So, and this is like a weird, this is where I get weirdly mystical about my writing, okay? I have taken a character and look what I've done to them. Look what I've done, Ashwani. I've beaten them down, right? And then I show their resilience. That's nice of me, great. But I have not let them off the hook. And I beat them down, I beat them down, and I beat them down. And when I use a character like that to explore the world and truth as I understand it, I owe that character something. And if I do not give it to them, I am a cruel God. And I do not want to be cruel, right? As the author, we are the God of this story. I can do anything I want. And what I've wanted to do is beat this character down to their lowest point. I owe them a choice at that point. Nowhere along the line did they have free will, right? They weren't able to avoid their story. They weren't able to have the Ruckus family come in and save the day. They weren't able to have their antagonist eaten by an alligator. They weren't able to have the tortoise descend on the moon and explain everything to us. Nowhere did they have that. So I owe them this one thing, that choice. And that has been Sunil, in a sense, that has been a kind of beacon for me to at least challenge my own biases somewhat, right? Is that I can do whatever, I can really, my objective is to confront this character, but I need to bring them to a point where they have a choice. And then I have to be open to hearing what they decide. That is not for me to decide. And that is, okay, so we're going into La La Land here. That is the mystical place that I try to arrive at in my storytelling, where I am now able to hear my character speak, my character make their choice, whether I like it or not. And it's not me. Now that's, Sunil, you would be right to say, anyone here would be right to say, that's BS, Otis. You don't do that. That's not possible. And you are totally right. So there you go. That's the paradox. The larger thing here, then, if we look at this story, right? And I'm sure you can think about this in the stories that you know, that this process is this story that's not an imitation of life in which people do not confront their things, but this story is momentous and important for our audience. It is a ritual, right? It is a ritual. It's a ritual of actual life, regardless of whether the issue was where you placed a teaspoon or whether it was an issue of life and death. It's still a ritual of this process of confronting our own vanity in a preparation for a transition to, the next life, if you want, right? Into that place at the end where everything is changed, right? You can't see the world the same way again. That transition into the afterlife, if you want, into the next stage of life, however you want to look at it, there's something now you can't go backwards. You don't see the world the same way ever again after this point. And that is a ritual. And as a ritual, the ritual story, it provides something for our audience. It embraces them in that ritual and maybe makes it seem not as frightening as we feel it is. So now we're getting up to a very mystical writing thing, which is that we as writers, we must practice being brave. Not physically, thank God, but intellectually. So anyway, I think that brings us to a good place here. But that's Ashwani, your work always inspires me. I really, because I know you are working in this vein. You're working with these materials, and these are the materials we're all working with. We want to start recognizing what kind of work we're doing. When we take people's, to me, I've always been this way. And honestly, I've not always been a good person to be around because of some of my feelings about our characters that we use in stories. But I think of our characters not as our little automatons that we get to do whatever we want with, but as human beings that are just like ourselves, in which we have a very particular role in relationship to these human beings as the author, as the God of the universe that we create. So we have to take that responsibility really, really seriously. It's so that's it, Abhinav. That's the whole story, all at once.
It is. Very interesting, useful session as always. And in particular today, I think we spent a lot of time talking about writing versus propaganda. And I think there's no firm line there, but it's more of a continuum that we have to recognize. And Ashwini, I think your story, for better or worse, served as a good talking point to initiate and trigger that discussion. But I think it's useful because I feel that if writing has to rely on propaganda to be popular, then I think we're probably missing or not recognizing the value of good writing. I think.
Well, Abhinav, one way I think of it too is like, each individual has their own struggles with the world and with everything themselves. But I say this consistently, it's like, if we're not struggling as a writer with something, we're probably not doing it right. And I would never say to anyone who is writing, and I've never said it, that writing is easy. The very fact that we're doing it is part of this struggle, because what we do is we're taking something from us and we're putting it out there as words, and then those words are a mirror not of the world, but of us. So we are engaged in a confrontation with our own words and with ourselves by writing. We're already involved in this struggle. To me, I guess it's a choice of how much do you want to embrace that, right? And use our writing as a vehicle for us to explore ourselves, right? And the world, which is simultaneous. Or do we want to maybe just move towards being a hack? Basically, that's the kind of, are we going to struggle as an artist with different kinds of results? Or are we going to be a hack and perfect our craft and, write Marvel movie after Marvel movie?
Yeah.
You might enjoy the lifestyle, but honestly wouldn't. Actually, I don't really think I would. So that's not the lifestyle for me. But you know, I can't fault people for their choices.
Very true. Folks, I think this is all we have time for. Do send in your pieces, and Otis, I will surely try and send you something this week on version 2 of the writers workshop.
Yeah, well, and let's get together. I mean, maybe if we see that we have some parameters, we can really beat the drums for some pieces now, and then we'll take some time off for the summer, and then we'll get, you know, with a plan to get back to it.
Yes.
In the fall. We think sometimes when something is just happening every day, it's sort of like I have a heavy bag that's right outside my office. I never hit that heavy bag, you know, but if I had to go and take it out of the closet and put it up and in and then put it away, then I might get out to it a little bit more often. So maybe I'm a little bit like that punching bag to you.
I hope not.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
And we'll see you hopefully next week if we get enough pieces, but take care and keep writing. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Otis.
Thank you. Good night.